The problem is that the burden of proof lies on someone making a claim that something is true, and therefore the problem is that every single claim contradicts Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is that Joseph Smith was not a prophet of God, but instead he was a con man. I agree, and I actually think that that should be the conclusion that everyone comes to anytime anyone claims to have seen God. You should assume that the person is lying, that they're a con artist, that they're psychotic before you think, wow, they probably did see God. You should not believe someone's extraordinary claims unless you have some kind of extraordinary evidence. I'm a psychiatrist, so I regularly see people who are psychotic who claim to interact with God, and I don't believe that they're actually interacting with God. Because a simpler explanation is that they're psychotic. So why would I believe Joseph Smith's claims? Am I just kind of stupid, or kind of brainwashed, or kind of inconsistent? Maybe. Or maybe there's something else going on too. So I have psychotic patients who believe that they are being followed by the FBI or the CIA. They have psychotic delusions around this. This does not mean that all people who have ever been followed by the CIA or FBI have psychotic delusions. So how do I differentiate claims between a psychotic person and a non-psychotic person? Well, there are diagnostic criteria for psychotic disorders like bipolar mania, schizoaffective disorder, schizophrenia, delusional disorder. So if someone who has one of these disorders is relating something to me that is extraordinary, I'm going to write it off probably as psychosis. So what about people who don't meet criteria for psychosis? They don't have the other signs and symptoms of schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar disorder with psychotic features. And they start making extraordinary claims like, I experienced God. Why don't I just throw all extraordinary claims in the garbage? Or on the flip side, why don't I just accept all extraordinary claims? Aliens and elves and dragons and unicorns, like someone with a schizotypal personality disorder, to sort of believe in all the magical things out there. There's a threshold of what we might call reasonable. So for me, I looked into religious claims. I read lots of books. I read the Bhagavad Gita, and I read the Guru Granth Sahib, and I read the Dhammapada, and I read a stack of books on near-death experiences, and I read the Bible, and I read the Book of Mormon, and I read the Quran, and lots of other books about religious experiences and all kinds of other things on these topics. And what I've discovered is that people have been relating spiritual experiences with a large degree of overlap for all of human history. And, as with other historical accounts, not everything always lines up, but many things do line up. Here's a visual which might help illustrate the idea that I'm trying to explain. There are certain things with many religions where most of the things overlap, and these also overlap with near-death experiences, doesn't disagree with science, aligns with maybe personal experiences, what's written in scriptures, and what's taught in other religions, and what's taught by spiritual leaders. And when certain things have a lot of overlap like this, we have multiple sources of evidence pointing to the same thing. This can be used as a way of saying that the thing is more likely accurate or correct. And what I see in religion is people all over the earth, in every continent, every language, every culture, separated by time and space, all believing roughly the same things. Large degree of overlap. People like Zoroaster and Zoroastrianism, praying and fasting, and then being visited by an angel who taught him essentially the same things that we find in most other religious beliefs of people who have the same kind of experience. Not all of them, of course. This is just like history. There are always outliers. And there's even explanations for some of these outliers. I've made videos on a lot of these explanations. Why don't I believe in aliens then? Well, if every single culture and every single language on every single continent and every single period of time all reported people experiencing aliens, and I'd known lots of other people who had experienced aliens, and I myself had experienced aliens, I'd probably believe in aliens. But that's not the case. Not even close. There's no comparison. It's such a minuscule amount, it's such a monumental amount of evidence and claims that I can't even put it on the same spectrum. It'd be less than 1 in a scale to 10,000. So yes, I am able to believe in God. And I don't have any burden of proving this to you. To prove something to someone is to convince them. I don't have the burden of convincing you. If you want to research it, research it. If you want to ask for some book recommendations, I can give you some. I personally know people who have had near-death experiences. I've talked to them. I believe them. I do not believe that they meet criteria for psychosis. I know people who've received personal revelation. The same thing applies. I do not believe that they meet criteria for psychosis. The near-death experiences seem to line up with the personal revelation. I myself have experienced things which I'm not going to relate here. All these things seem to, for the most part, line up with the scriptures and with other religions and spiritual leaders. And also with what makes sense to me and with things that don't disagree with science. Consequently, I believe that there is a God. I don't pretend to know everything about this, but this is what I believe. Now, some people have claimed to have interacted with God. I actually know a lot of people in varying degrees claiming to interact with God. Some of them I believe and some of them I don't. Now, in the case of Joseph Smith, it's perfectly viable for someone to conclude that Joseph Smith was a con artist. It's a very reasonable conclusion to come to. I personally, after having done a lot of studying, have not come to the conclusion that Joseph Smith was primarily a con artist. I believe that God actually did interact with him. Not to say I don't think he ever did anything bad or that he ever lied. Not to say that I think that he knew everything or was right about everything. But I do believe that God interacted with Joseph Smith. That is what Joseph Smith claimed, and that is what his family believed. His mother, his father, his brothers, and his sisters, of which there are a lot. They, knowing him better than anyone, believed him, even at the age of 14, that he was earnest, that he was honest, that he was relating his experiences as he was experiencing them. And they maintained this belief all the way through his life, and all the way through their lives. And I've read many biographies and many books about Joseph Smith. And I believe that he did, in fact, interact with God. And I also have personal experiences, which I believe confirm this. Now, I could be wrong. I've explored that possibility. Although I believe Joseph Smith was a prophet of God, some people claim that he became a fallen prophet. Other people claim that he was a con artist. If he's a con artist, then in my opinion, he's a genius, which is what I would call the worst case scenario. He's a genius who created what I consider to be the best church on the face of the earth. Now, I'm not convinced that Joseph Smith was a con artist, because if he was a con artist, then I'd have to also conclude that his mother, his father, and all of his siblings were also con artists for their entire lives, which, having read books about them and autobiographies, I am not able to believe. Now, maybe he was just a deluded person who was having strange psychopathic experiences, but he doesn't seem to meet criteria for psychiatric diagnoses from the books that I've read about him. So to me, the worst case scenario seems improbable based on the studying that I have done. So for me, worst case scenario, this is a man-made church. So I guess I'll compare it to other man-made churches. To me, they're not as well organized, they're not as much not giving as much support to keep the commandments. I don't feel the Spirit as strongly in the other churches. I don't really like the paid ministry. So I'm comparing man-made churches to other man-made churches, but the other Protestant churches are just made by people who are not as much of a genius as Joseph Smith, in the worst case scenario. And frankly, the same thing applies to these other churches. So based on the things that I've read and the things that I've studied, the thinking that I have done, the personal experiences that I've had, the contact with other people that I know who've had similar experiences as I've had, I believe that Joseph Smith was a prophet of God, that he interacted with God. That is the simplest explanation for the evidence that I have exposure to. It might seem complex to you. It might not seem like the simplest answer to you that fits the evidence. When I studied microbiology, we learned about how the immune system works, and it's extremely complicated. But the system that we have set up is the only one that fits the evidence. So even though it's complex, it is what we believe about the immune system. And it's the same way with Joseph Smith. Even though maybe it's not the simplest answer, it might be easier for you to just say, oh, he was a con man. That doesn't mean that it's easiest for me. Because then I'd have to throw away all of my own personal experiences, all of the personal experiences of all the people that I know, that I believe. I'd have to throw away all these near-death experiences. I'd have to disregard all the testimonies of every one of his family members, or conclude that they're all con artists together, which doesn't fit for me based on the things that I've read. And I have no burden to prove this to you. You can believe whatever you want.